The bell from the parish tower struck the half-hour, and Marisol Penhallow realized, with the slow horror of a woman watching a kettle boil over, that she was standing in the wrong place. The wheat was wrong. That was the first thing her eye caught, before the silk pavilion, before the laughter drifting from the long table beneath it, before the liveried footmen carrying silver trays of cold partridge across the cropped grass. The wheat was wrong because it was not wheat at all, but a half-hearted barley laid out in rows that ran north to south on a slope that ought to have been turned the other way. Her father would have wept. Her father, in fact, had wept over fields like this 15 years ago, before the bank took everything and his hands went still in his lap forever. She was not supposed to be looking at the field. She was supposed to be at the long table, smiling pleasantly, eating partridge she could not afford to taste, and pretending she was the friend Crispin Drogue had said she would be playing for an afternoon. Just a country luncheon, he had told her, a Duke's harvest viewing, a handful of guests. The man wants to look agricultural before Parliament reconvenes. Sit beside me, eat what you're given, and at the end of the day, there will be coin enough to settle Linus's note at the chandler. That had been the bargain. A gown borrowed from Crispin's cousin, gloves she did not own, and a quiet seat at a table among people who would never look twice at her. Except Crispin was not at the table. Marisol stood at the edge of the barley with the wind moving warm against the back of her neck, and she counted, very carefully, the number of people inside the pavilion. 11. She counted them twice. 11, and not one of them was the man who had brought her here. The carriage that had delivered them was no longer in the drive. The bay gelding tied to the post by the orchard was no longer there either. Crispin Drogue had gone, and he had taken with him the small leather case in which he had told her, very particularly, she should not look. Heat rose in her face that had nothing to do with the August sun. "Miss." The voice came from behind her, low and not unkind, but cut through with something that was not quite curiosity. She turned too quickly. Her slipper caught the hem of the borrowed muslin, and for an instant she swayed, one gloved hand reaching out and finding nothing, before she steadied herself. He was standing perhaps 4 paces from her, between her and the pavilion, and he had been standing there. She understood with a cold drop in her stomach, for some time. He was tall. That was the first thing she noted, because she always noted height first. Her father had been tall, and tall men carried themselves either like apologies or like sentences, and this man carried himself like the latter. He was perhaps 32, black coat, no waistcoat embroidery, no fobs, no rings, the sort of austerity that on another man would have read as poverty, and on this one read unmistakably as money so old it had stopped needing to announce itself. His hair was dark and cut close. His eyes were a pale, exhausted gray. "You have wandered some distance from the table," he said. "I have. May I ask why?" She might have lied. She had a half-dozen lies prepared for the day, all of them written on the carriage ride down by Crispin, and rehearsed against the rocking of the wheels. I felt faint. I sought air. I am unused to the country. They sat in her mouth like coins she could not bring herself to spend. "The barley is planted wrong," she said. There was a pause, a long one, long enough that she became aware of a wood pigeon calling somewhere behind her, and of the dust on the toes of his boots, and of the precise, terrible silence that had settled over the man's face. "I beg your pardon?" "It is planted on a north-south alignment on a south-facing slope," Marisol said, because she had already begun, and there was no graceful place to stop. "Which means the rows shade one another for the best part of the morning. The heads on the eastern side are coming on a full week behind the western. You will lose perhaps 1/6 of the yield, more if there is rain in the next 10 days. and it is not even a proper barley. It is a coast strain. It wants salt air. It will mildew before Michaelmas." She heard the words leave her, and she could not call them back, and she did not, in truth, particularly want to. The man's expression did not change. That was the most disconcerting thing of all. A flicker would have been a kindness. A flicker would have meant he was a man. "And how precisely? Would you have me know any of that?" he said quietly, "if I had not just heard it from the mouth of a young woman in borrowed gloves?" She felt the blood leave her face. "You have not introduced yourself, miss." "I am." She stopped. Crispin had given her a name to use, a false name, Miss Holloway, a cousin of his cousin's, a respectable nothing. She opened her mouth to say it, and what came out instead was, "Marisol Penhallow." "Penhallow," he repeated, and now something did move behind his eyes. Not surprise, something colder. Something that knew the name and was placing it, the way one places a stone in the cleft of a wall. Of Suffolk? Of nowhere now. Of a house in Camden Town and a small back room my mother lets out when she can find a tenant. But your father was Edmund Penhallow, of the Suffolk Penhallows. He was. The barley man. It was the word her father had carried like a wound in the years after the bank, when other men had used it as a sneer. The barley man. As though the strain he had bred, the long-strawed, drought-loving, sweet malt Penhallow barley that had once been bought by every brewer between Norwich and the sea, had been a folly, and not the thing that fed 3 counties for 2 decades before a partner with clean fingernails had ruined him. "He was the barley man," Marisol said. "Yes." Behind the stranger, at the pavilion, someone had risen from the table, a woman in pale green. She was looking toward them, one hand shading her eyes, and even at this distance, Marisol could see the precise angle of her displeasure. "You ought to know," the stranger said, in the same low and unmoved voice, "that you are speaking to the man whose barley you have just declared a disaster." The bottom of the day fell out from under her. He waited. He did not enjoy it. She could see that. There was no cruelty in his face, only that cold, patient quality of a man waiting to see whether the person before him would crack, run, or stand. Whichever she did, she understood, would settle the matter for him. Permanently. She did not run. "Then I am sorry, Your Grace," she said, and her voice held, by some grace she did not herself understand. "I am sorry I have spoken out of turn at your table. I am not sorry I have spoken truly. The barley is wrong. You will lose the field. If your steward has told you otherwise, your steward is either a liar or a fool, and in either case he is costing you a great deal of money." The man, the Duke, looked at her for a long, unreadable moment. "Walk back with me," he said. "Your Grace." "Walk back with me, Miss Penhallow. We are being watched, and a man in my position cannot afford to be seen abandoning a young woman in a field. Whatever else you and I have to say to one another, we shall say it under the awning, in front of my guests, with our voices pleasant." He offered his arm. It wasn't a courtesy. It was an instruction. She took it. The wool of his sleeve was warm from the sun. She felt the flat strength of his forearm beneath her glove, and she felt the eyes of every person beneath the silk pavilion fix upon them as they began to walk. And she understood, with the quiet, awful clarity of a woman watching a door close behind her, that whatever this afternoon had been when she stepped out of the carriage, it was no longer that. "The woman in green," she said, low, because she had to say something or the silence would devour her. "Who is she?" "Lady Drusilla Marchpane." "She is staring at me as though I have stolen something of hers." "You have," the Duke said, "though she has not yet been told what." "What is your name, Your Grace?" Ambrose Thrale. Wenford. The Duke of Wenford. She had heard the name. Of course she had heard the name. Everyone south of the Trent had heard the name. The Wenford estates ran across 3 counties. The Wenford ledgers, her father had once said in a rare unguarded moment, were the only private accounts in England that rivaled the Crown's. And she, Marisol Penhallow, daughter of a ruined seedsman in borrowed muslin, with a man's leather case lost somewhere on the road, had walked into a Wenford harvest and told the Duke of Wenford his barley was a disaster. They were 10 paces from the pavilion now. She could hear the conversation under the silk, a laugh brittle as a sugar pane. Lady Drusilla's voice raised just a little too brightly. And apparently a guest of Mr. Droge's. Though where Mr. Droge himself has gone, Your Grace, Marisol said, very quickly, very quietly. I cannot stay to luncheon. I do not know what arrangement you believe Mr. Droge made on my behalf, but whatever it was, I was not party to it. He has gone. I should go too. If you will permit me to, I will not. Your Grace, you will sit at my table, Miss Penhallow. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. You will eat what is set before you. You will be charming, or, failing that, silent. And when the others have gone home, you and I will speak again about my barley. Do we understand one another? She looked up at him. She had expected, in that look, to find arrogance, the closed face of a man accustomed to being obeyed. What she found instead, for a flickering instant, was something else. A wariness, almost a hunger, as though somewhere beneath the cold gray of his eyes, a calculation was running that he had not expected to need to run today. We understand one another, Your Grace, she said. They stepped beneath the awning. 11 faces turned. 11 faces, and one in particular, Lady Drusilla Marchpane in pale green silk, with a small jeweled hand resting at the base of her throat, went perfectly, beautifully still. My friends, said the Duke of Wenford, and his voice carried easily now, light and warm and edged, like a saber wrapped in velvet. Forgive my absence. I have been receiving some uncommonly direct advice on my barley. May I present Miss Marisol Penhallow, daughter, as some of you will recall, of the late Edmund Penhallow of Suffolk. She has come at my particular invitation. The lie was so smooth and so absolute that for a moment Marisol did not understand it had been spoken on her behalf. Then she did. And the field, the pavilion, the 11 faces, the woman in green, all of it tilted very gently around her and held. How perfectly delightful, said Lady Drusilla, and her smile was a thin and lovely thing. Wenford, you really must tell us. How long have you been corresponding with Miss Penhallow? The Duke did not look at Marisol. Long enough, he said. The chair he set her in had a cushion of pale yellow silk, and Marisol noticed, as she lowered herself into it, that her hands were perfectly steady. She did not know why. Some women, faced with disaster, wept. Some shouted. Some fainted, and were grateful for the excuse. Marisol Penhallow, it appeared, became extremely calm. Her father had been the same. Worst of all the Penhallow traits, her mother used to say, because it makes you forget you are afraid until afterwards, and by then it is too late to be sensible about it. Cold partridge for Miss Penhallow, the Duke said to a footman without turning his head. And the elder cordial, not the wine. She glanced at him. He had judged, correctly, that wine would be the end of her. Penhallow, said a man across the table, a florid gentleman in a waistcoat the color of butter, who had been introduced to her, in the Duke's perfectly easy fashion, as Sir Hugh Marchpane, Lady Drusilla's uncle, of course. Penhallow, Now there's a name a man does not hear at a London table anymore. Edmund Penhallow's girl, are you? I am, sir. Bad business, that. Bad business. Carrick was the partner, was he not? Yes, Carrick. Skinned your father like a coney and walked off whistling. Heard he died abroad, Carrick. Choked on a fishbone in Lisbon, if there is justice in the world. There is not, generally, Marisol said, but in that particular case the fishbone obliged. There was a beat of silence, and then Sir Hugh laughed, a great delighted bark of a laugh, and slapped the table so that the cutlery jumped. Ha! Wenford, where did you find her? Eh? Where? She has the old man's tongue, by God. At a lending library, the Duke said, in Cheltenham. It was the second lie. The first had been at my particular invitation. This one was smaller, smoother, slipped in like a coin into a sleeve. A lending library in Cheltenham. Marisol had never been to Cheltenham. She had not, in fact, set foot west of Reading in her life. She picked up her glass of cordial, and she drank, and she said nothing. Lady Drusilla Marchpane, 2 seats to the Duke's right, had not yet spoken. She was watching Marisol over the rim of her wineglass, the way a cat watches a wren that has come too near the kitchen step. How charming, she said at last, into a small lull. And how unusual. Wenford, I had not realized you were in the habit of frequenting lending libraries. I am not. My sister is. Ah, Lady Honoria. Just so. And Lady Honoria has been corresponding with Miss Penhallow ever since. For the better part of a year. How very industrious of her. Lady Drusilla turned her smile, full force, on Marisol. It was a beautiful smile. Marisol had seen ironwork less precise. And what is it, Miss Penhallow, that has brought you so far from Cheltenham at the height of harvest? The question was a snare. Marisol felt it set, very neatly beneath her chair. Lady Honoria has been kind enough to invite me, she said, to assist her with a small project of hers. She is preparing a paper on English grain. The Duke did not move, but she felt beside her the smallest infinitesimal stillness of a man who had not expected her to invent quite so cleanly. A paper, said Lady Drusilla, for her own interest only. She has a great curiosity for the practical arts. I am to advise her on the older strains. My father, Marisol set down the glass, bred a number of them. How extraordinary. Lady Drusilla's eyes had gone very pale. Wenford, did you know your sister was writing a paper? Honoria writes a great many things, the Duke said pleasantly, and tells me about almost none of them. It is the chief virtue of having a sister. Sir Hugh laughed again. 2 of the other guests laughed with him. The moment, somehow, slid past. But Lady Drusilla, Marisol understood, hadn't laughed. Lady Drusilla had stored the lie away, neat as folded linen, in a drawer she would open later. The luncheon went on. It went on for an hour and a half that felt, to Marisol, like the better part of a winter. The cold partridge tasted of nothing. The bread tasted of nothing. The conversation moved over her head like a flock of birds, whose direction she could not predict. And twice, she felt the Duke's hand brush very lightly the back of her chair. Not her shoulder, not her sleeve. The chair itself. A reminder. Steady, Miss Penhallow. We are not finished. When at last the company began to rise, and the carriages were called, and the long ritual of farewells began under the awning, Lady Drusilla came to her. Miss Penhallow, she said, low and warm, with her gloved hand light upon Marisol's arm. I do hope we shall see a great deal of one another. London is so very small at this time of year. One cannot avoid running across friends. Your ladyship is too kind. Not at all. And do tell me, That gown. It is beautifully made. Where did you have it from? Marisol felt the trap, felt it close. The gown was Crispin Droge's cousin's, and Crispin Droge's cousin was a milliner's daughter in Holborn, and the modiste's stamp inside the seam, Marisol had checked that morning, against her own better judgment, was a name no woman of Lady Drusilla's circle would ever have crossed. From a small house in the north, Marisol said, I do not believe your ladyship would know it. How disappointing. Lady Drusilla's smile went, briefly, sharp. I make it a point to know everyone. She squeezed Marisol's arm, a touch like a pin, and was gone. The carriages departed one by one. The footman began to clear the table. The wood pigeon, somewhere, was still calling. Marisol stood at the edge of the cleared grass with her gloves in her hands and the borrowed muslin clinging to her in the heat. And she waited, because she had been told to wait, and because, in any case, she had nowhere else to go. The Duke crossed the grass to her. Miss Penhallow. Your Grace. My steward will be here in a quarter of an hour. Before he comes, I require 3 things from you. The first is the truth about Mr. Crispin Droge. The second is the truth about why a young woman who knows more about barley than any man on my payroll is traveling under a false name in his carriage. The third, he stopped. For the first time that day, Ambrose Thrale, Duke of Wenford, looked, for just an instant, like a man uncertain of his ground. The third we shall come to, he said, in a moment. She lifted her chin. Ask, Your Grace. Mr. Droge, what was in the leather case? I do not know. Miss Penhallow. I do not know, Your Grace, because he forbade me to look, and I am in the foolish habit of keeping my word even to men who do not deserve it. But I can tell you what I suspect. Suspect, then. I suspect, Marisol said, that Mr. Droge came here today, not to bring me to your luncheon, but to use me as cover for something else. I suspect that the case held papers, or possibly money, that he wished to deliver, or to remove, from this estate without being seen to do so. I suspect that I was the ribbon on the parcel, and I suspect, her voice held, by something very like spite, that whoever in your household was waiting to receive that case from him is sitting in your steward's office at this moment, wondering why Mr. Droge did not appear. The Duke's face did not move, but something in his eyes had gone, suddenly, very still. Your steward will be here in a quarter of an hour, Your Grace, Marisol said. I should not, were I you, send for him quite yet. A footman at the edge of the lawn cleared his throat. Your Grace. A rider. Both their heads turned. A horseman was coming up the long drive at a hard gallop, pale dust rising behind him, hat low against the sun. Not a steward, not a guest. A boy in the Wenford livery, riding as though the ground behind him were on fire, and in his hand, Your Grace, the boy gasped, dragging the lathered horse to a halt at the foot of the lawn. From the south barn, Your Grace, Mr. Droge. The Duke went very still. Speak, boy. Found him in the lane, Your Grace, by the south barn. He's been took with a blow to the head. He's alive, Your Grace, but he's not waking. And the case, what of the case? The case, Your Grace, is gone. It was past 4 o'clock before they were alone. The Duke had moved through the next hour with the cold, efficient grace of a man who had managed crises before, and intended to manage this one without losing a button. Crispin Droge had been carried up the back stairs of Wenford Hall and laid in a guest room that smelled, faintly, of cedar and old lavender. A surgeon had been sent for from the neighboring village. The steward, a thin, bald, watchful man named Mr. Patch, had been received in the Duke's study and dismissed again within 4 minutes, looking, Marisol thought, like a man who had been weighed in a scale he had not known he was standing on. 2 grooms had been sent at speed along the south lane. A note had been written and sealed and given to a third groom and sent to London. And through all of it, the Duke had kept Marisol within arm's reach. He had not touched her. He had not spoken to her, beyond the short courtesies required when servants were within hearing. But he had positioned her, beside him in the front hall, at his elbow, in the long gallery, on the settee opposite his desk in the study, so that no person who passed through Wenford Hall in that hour could have failed to note that the young woman in borrowed muslin was the Duke's particular concern. It was not, she understood, kindness. It was a chess move. He was placing her, in front of every servant and witness in the house, exactly where he meant her to be found later. When the study door at last closed behind the steward, and the click of the latch fell into the quiet, the Duke crossed to the sideboard and poured 2 small glasses of something amber and brought one to her. "Drink it." "Your Grace, I do not." "Drink it, Miss Penhallow. You have not eaten today, and you have been very brave for a very long time, and I require you in possession of your wits for what comes next." She drank it. It was brandy. It went down like a hot wire and bloomed, slowly, into something steadier. He sat, not behind the desk, but in the chair opposite hers. He set his own glass down, untouched. "I owe you," he said, "an apology and an offer. I shall make the apology first, because it is the cheaper of the two. I am sorry that you were brought into this house under a false pretense by a man who has, at the lowest reading, used you as a screen for petty theft, and at the highest reading, endangered you considerably. You did not deserve it." "No," Marisol said, "I did not. The offer is more complicated." "I imagined it would be." He almost smiled. It was the first time. It did not last. "My grandmother," he said. "The Dowager Duchess arrives at Wenford Hall the day after tomorrow. She is bringing with her Lady Drusilla Marchpane, Lady Drusilla's mother, and a written agreement of marriage, the terms of which she expects me to sign by the end of the week. I have known about this for some time. I have been delaying it for some time. I had today, in fact, intended to delay it further by being seen to be distracted by other concerns of estate. My barley, for instance. My harvest. The fact that I am, this season, deeply absorbed in matters of the land. And instead of a distraction, Marisol said slowly, you found a young woman who told you your barley was a disaster. Just so. She set the empty glass down on the small table between them. Your Grace, I am not going to marry you. No, Miss Penhallow, I am not asking you to. Then, I am asking you, he said, to stay at Wenford Hall for a fortnight, as my sister Honoria's guest, as the agricultural authority she has been corresponding with for the better part of a year, as the consultant I have engaged to walk my fields and report to me, in writing, on the state of the harvest. You will be lodged in the green wing. You will be paid a sum we shall agree upon. And you will, by your visible presence in this house, give me the only thing I cannot give myself, a reason, in front of my grandmother and Lady Drusilla, and the whole of the watching county, why I cannot possibly attend to a marriage contract this week. Marisol stared at him. Your Grace, you are proposing that I pretend to be a woman of agricultural distinction, engaged in serious work upon my estate, which, Miss Penhallow, you are. You are not pretending. That is the elegance of it. You will not be required to lie about a single thing, beyond the question of how long my sister has been writing to you, and that lie my sister will tell with great enthusiasm the moment I send for her. And in exchange? In exchange, the Duke said, you will be paid £200 at the close of the fortnight. The air left her lungs. £200. £200 was a year of her mother's mending. £200 was Linus's note at the chandler twice over, and the back rent, and the doctor for her father's chest. £200 was the difference between getting through winter and not. She did not let him see it on her face. That is a great deal of money, Your Grace. It is a fortnight of your time, and the use of your name, and the considerable risk to your reputation. It is not, in fact, enough. But it is what I am offering. And when the fortnight is over, you will go home with a letter from me commending your knowledge to any landowner in England who has the wit to read it, and a separate letter from my sister calling you the dearest friend of her acquaintance. You will not, Miss Penhallow, return to a life of borrowed muslin. I shall see to that. She looked at him for a long moment. He was not, she realized, asking. He had not all afternoon asked anything. He had simply set out, with the polite ruthlessness of a man who had grown up in rooms where every conversation was a transaction, the position into which he intended to move her. And there were, of course, very good reasons to refuse. Her reputation. Her mother. The simple animal sense that any arrangement which began with a beaten man and a missing leather case was an arrangement that would not end well for the smallest party in the room. But there was the barley. There was the field she had seen from the edge of the lawn. There were the rows running the wrong way. There was the strain that ought never to have been planted on a clay slope 10 miles from the sea. There was, somewhere on this estate, a steward who was either a fool or a thief, and there was a duke who did not yet know which, and Marisol Penhallow, daughter of Edmund Penhallow, granddaughter of Tobias Penhallow, who had been growing barley on the same Suffolk acres since before the Hanoverians, knew with the bone-deep certainty of a woman who had been raised among seed sacks that she was the only person in this house who could tell him. And there were the £200. I have 3 conditions, Your Grace. The Duke's brows lifted very slightly. Of course you do. The first, my mother is to be told the truth. Not the polite version, the truth. That I have accepted a paid post at Wenford Hall as an agricultural consultant, that I am lodged respectably in the household of the Duke's sister, and that I shall be home in a fortnight with a letter and a sum of money. You will write the letter yourself in your own hand, and a footman of yours will deliver it tomorrow morning before noon. Done. The second. Mr. Crispin Droge is not to be turned out into the road. Whatever he has done, whatever he was carrying in that case, he is the friend of my brother, and he is currently lying in your guest room with a head wound, and I will not begin a fortnight in your employ by stepping over his body. He stays until the surgeon says he can be moved, and when he can be moved, he is moved gently, and he is not handed to the magistrate until I have spoken with him. A pause. That, the Duke said, is a more interesting condition. May I ask why? Because he is going to tell me who in your household paid him, Your Grace, and you are going to want to know that before the magistrate does. He considered her. The gray of his eyes had warmed, fractionally, to something like respect. Done. Your third? Marisol drew breath. The third, she said, is the most important. The moment your grandmother arrives at Wenford Hall, the moment Lady Drusilla sets foot in this house, the moment any one of them looks at me as though I am an ornament you have purchased to inconvenience them, you will not defend me. You will not lie for me. You will not extend my position by a single hour beyond what we have agreed. I am here for the fields. I am here for the harvest. I am here for £200 and a letter. I am not here, Your Grace, to be your shield. If at any point in this fortnight you find yourself tempted to use me as one, the agreement ends and I take the next coach home. Are we clear? The clock on the mantel struck the quarter. The Duke of Wenford rose. He crossed to the desk. He took up a clean sheet of paper, dipped his pen, and wrote in a sloped, decisive hand that took Marisol perhaps 4 seconds to read upside down, 3 lines and a sum, and signed it, and pressed his seal into the wax. He brought it to her. "Your terms, Miss Penhallow, in writing, before witnesses are called." She took the paper. Her hand was, again, perfectly steady. "We have an agreement, Your Grace." "We have an agreement, Miss Penhallow." He did not at any point offer his hand. She did not at any point expect him to. She had not yet noticed. She would not notice for several hours until she was alone in the green wing, in front of a looking-glass that was older than her father, that somewhere between the field and the study, between the wood pigeon and the brandy, the borrowed muslin had picked up, along its hem, 3 pale, perfect, unmistakable heads of the wrong barley. She had carried them in with her all afternoon, like a verdict she had not yet been asked to deliver. By Monday, she would deliver it. The green wing of Wenford Hall ran along the eastern face of the house, 3 rooms deep, and Marisol understood, the moment she stepped into it, that it had not been opened for guests in a very long time. The dust covers had been pulled off in haste. One of them lay in a pale heap by the door, like a sail that had not quite finished falling. The windows had been thrown wide. A girl of perhaps 17, in a starched apron, was on her knees at the grate, coaxing a fire that did not yet wish to be coaxed. "Miss Penhallow," said a voice behind her. "I am Mrs. Quill, housekeeper. You will find the bell pull beside the bed. The girl is Aldith, and she is yours for the duration of your stay. Dinner is at 7. The Duke takes it in the small dining room, alone, when he does not have guests. Tonight, he has asked that you join him. Have I forgotten anything?" Mrs. Quill was a small, neat, formidable woman, with gray hair pinned so tight, Marisol felt her own scalp ache in sympathy. There was no judgment in her face. There was no welcome either. There was simply the perfect blankness of a senior servant who had not yet decided what she thought of the new arrival, and who would not be hurried into deciding. "Thank you, Mrs. Quill. That is very thorough. Your trunks, miss?" Marisol's mouth opened, and then closed. She had no trunks. She had a reticule with 3 shillings in it, a borrowed gown on her back, and 3 heads of the wrong barley snagged in her hem. That was the whole of her worldly establishment at Wenford Hall. Mrs. Quill, who had been a housekeeper for 31 years, observed this in perhaps half a second. Her face did not change. "I shall have Aldith lay out a wrapper and a fresh chemise for tonight, miss," she said smoothly. "Lady Honoria will be with us tomorrow morning, and Lady Honoria has a great many gowns. We shall manage. Was there anything else?" "No, Mrs. Quill, thank you." "Very good, miss." A small inclination of the head, and, "Miss." The housekeeper paused at the door. "His Grace has asked that I tell you Mr. Droge is sleeping. The surgeon has bound the wound. He has spoken once. He asked for water, and then for you, and then he slept again." Marisol's chest tightened. "He asked for me. By name, miss. Mrs. Quill. His Grace has set a man at the door, miss, and another at the foot of the back stairs. Mr. Droge will not leave this house tonight, nor will any person reach him who is not known to the Duke. Sleep easy, miss." And then, almost too quietly to be heard, "Such of it as you can manage." The door clicked shut. Marisol stood in the center of the green wing for a long moment, looking at nothing. Then she crossed to the window. The fields ran out from the back of Wenford Hall in long, unequal stripes, hedged in dark thorn, sloping down toward a band of trees that marked, she suspected, the line of a brook. The wrong barley field, his wrong barley field, was off to the south, just visible at the curve of the drive, a paler and unhappier green than it had any business being in August. From this height, She could see what she had only suspected from the lawn, that the rows were not merely badly aligned, but that the planting was uneven, sparse in patches, almost generous in others, as though whoever had drilled the seed had been doing it in a hurry, or in the dark, or with his attention fixed somewhere other than the work in his hands. A steward who was either a fool or a thief, possibly both. Miss Aldith, the maid, had risen from the grate. She was looking at Marisol with the cautious interest of a girl who had been told to be respectful to a guest and had not quite been told why. Miss, I'm to ask, for tonight, miss, would you wish a tray, or will you go down? I shall go down, Aldith, thank you. Yes, miss. A beat. Miss. Yes? The girl flushed. Mrs. Quill said I weren't to ask, miss. But are you the lady what told his grace his barley was wrong? Marisol turned from the window. I am, Aldith. Why? Because, miss. Aldith's voice dropped almost to a whisper. Mr. Patch said something at supper last night, miss, in the servants' hall, before all of this. He said the barley field was none of anyone's business, and a person what asked questions about it would find themselves walked off the estate before sundown. And I thought, miss, when I heard about you, I thought you ought to know. Marisol looked at the girl for a long moment. Aldith, how old are you? 16, miss. 17 at Michaelmas. You are a very brave girl, Aldith. No, miss. The flush deepened. I'm only a careful one. She curtsied and was gone. Marisol turned back to the window. The sun was beginning its long, slow yellowing into evening. Somewhere down by the brook, a dog was barking. 3 short notes and a pause. 3 short notes and a pause. Inside the green wing, the fire had finally caught, and was sending up a pale, unsteady plume of smoke. She had been at Wenford Hall for 3 hours. She had been warned by a girl of 16 that the Duke's own steward had threatened to walk a person off the estate for asking the question Marisol had been hired, in writing, to answer. She did not yet know whether to be afraid. She thought perhaps that she ought to wait until afterwards. She was woken at dawn by a carriage in the drive. For a moment, lying in a strange bed under linen that smelled of lavender and old cedar, Marisol did not understand what had woken her. The light through the unshuttered window was the color of weak tea. Somewhere in the corridor, a door opened and closed with the soft, urgent rhythm of servants who had been called before they expected to be called. And below, on the gravel of the front drive, a coachman was speaking sharply to a groom about the offside wheel. A door 2 corridors away opened and shut again. Footsteps. A voice she did not yet know. A woman's voice, low and clipped and very awake, saying, "Where is my grandson? Wake him." Marisol sat up in bed. She had been told the dowager would arrive the day after tomorrow. The dowager had arrived now. Aldith was at the door before the bell had finished ringing, with a wrapper of dove-gray wool over her arm and her cap slightly askew. "Miss, oh, miss, her grace! The dowager is in the breakfast room, and Lady Honoria is coming up the stairs. And Lady Honoria says you are not to receive her grace before you have eaten and dressed properly. And Lady Honoria says, Aldith." "Yes, miss." "Breathe." The girl breathed. "I am going to dress," Marisol said calmly. "You are going to help me. We are not going to hurry. Whoever the dowager has come to find this morning, and I assure you, Aldith, it is not me, she will keep until I have eaten." It was the lie of a woman whose stomach had become a small, clenched fist. But Aldith, hearing it, steadied. The wrapper went over Marisol's shoulders. A jug of warm water appeared. A simple morning gown of pale cream, Lady Honoria's, was produced from somewhere and shaken out and pressed against Marisol's back and pinned and judged passable. "Your hair, miss," said Aldith, with the seriousness of a girl arming a knight. "We shall do plain. Plain is good. Plain says you are not afraid. Plain it is." The door of the green wing opened without a knock, and a young woman burst into the room. She was perhaps 19. She was small and dark-haired, and her eyes were the same exhausted gray as her brother's, except that in her face, the gray had not yet learned to be cold. She crossed the room in 3 strides, took Marisol's hands in both of hers, and said very quickly and very low, "I am Honoria. I am your dearest friend in the world. We have been corresponding for 14 months on the subject of English grain. You came to me originally through a Mrs. Edgware of Cheltenham, who is dead, conveniently, and cannot be applied to. Do not worry about anything. Smile at her. Disagree with her once, but only once. She despises a coward, and she despises a sycophant in equal measure, and you will fall into one or the other within the first 3 minutes, and the trick is to choose which. Lady Honoria, we are dearest friends. Try. Honoria, I do not. I know you do not. Ambrose told me everything in a note by candlelight at 2:30 this morning, and I have had perhaps an hour's sleep, and I am going to enjoy this enormously, I warn you. She is not as terrible as she looks. She is rather more terrible, in fact, but she is fair. Come." She drew Marisol to the door. "One last thing." Honoria stopped, hand on the latch. Her gray eyes had gone, briefly, very grave. "She will ask you, somewhere in the first 10 minutes, whether you came here in the hope of marrying my brother. Tell her the truth, whatever the truth is. Do not lie to her about that one thing. She has a nose for it. She buried 2 husbands and 3 sons, Miss Penhallow, and there is nothing left in her that can be deceived." She opened the door. The breakfast room of Wenford Hall faced east, and the sun was just beginning to fill it as Marisol stepped through the door. The Dowager Duchess of Wenford was seated at the head of the small table, with a cup of black coffee untouched before her, her silver hair pinned high, her gown the deep unbroken black of permanent mourning. Her hands rested folded in her lap. Her face was the face of a woman who had once been beautiful and who had been replaced over the long years by a thinner and harder and considerably more interesting woman wearing the first one's bones. Her eyes, when they fixed on Marisol, were the color of slate after rain. "Sit," she said. Marisol sat. "You are the Penhallow girl." "I am, your grace." "You are eating my grandson's bread under the pretense of being my granddaughter's correspondent." "I am eating it, your grace, under the pretense of being your granddaughter's agricultural authority, which, as I understand, is a slightly different falsehood." The dowager's eyes did not move, but somewhere very deep in them, a small light came on. "And which part of the falsehood is true, Miss Penhallow?" "The agricultural part, your grace. I do know grain. I know it as well as any man on this estate, and I know the Penhallow strains better than any man in England, because my father bred them, and my grandfather bred their parents, and I helped to walk the test rows from the time I was 9 years old. The friendship with Lady Honoria is, as your grace has guessed, of more recent invention. Of yesterday afternoon's invention, in fact. Just so. Did you come here, Miss Penhallow, in the hope of marrying my grandson?" The room held very still. Honoria, just behind Marisol's shoulder, did not breathe. "No, your grace." "Why not?" It was not the question Marisol had prepared for. "I beg your pardon, your grace." "Why not?" The dowager's voice was perfectly even. "He is a duke. He is not yet 33. He is, I am told, considered handsome, although I confess I see only my son in him, and my eye is not impartial. He has 50,000 a year. He has houses in 3 counties, and a reputation, in the matter of his dependents, that is adequate. Most young women of your circumstances would consider him a fortune worth a great deal of pretense to acquire. You are sitting at my breakfast table in my granddaughter's gown, and you tell me you have not come here to marry him. Why not?" Marisol drew breath. "Because, Your Grace, I have watched what happens to women who marry men who have hired them. And because," her voice did not rise, did not shake, it simply held, "your grandson does not need a wife at present. Your grandson needs a man on this estate who is not lying to him about his barley. I am here for the second thing, Your Grace, not the first." The silence that followed was long enough for Marisol to count the ticks of the small clock on the mantel. 6, 7, 8. The Dowager Duchess of Wenford lifted her cup of coffee, drank from it once, set it down with the smallest possible click, and said, "I do not yet like you, Miss Penhallow." "No, Your Grace. But I do not, at present, dislike you either. That is more than I can say for almost any young woman who has crossed this threshold in the last 6 months. You will stay. You will do the work my grandson has hired you to do. You will, for the duration of your stay, address me as ma'am rather than Your Grace, because Your Grace is the address of a stranger, and I am, alas, going to be your hostess. And you will know, Miss Penhallow, that I have arrived 3 days before I was expected, because my granddaughter wrote to me on Tuesday morning to say that something at this house was wrong, and that she did not yet know what it was." "So," the Dowager's slate eyes did not blink, "tell me what is wrong here, Miss Penhallow. Begin with the barley." Marisol began with the barley. She talked for 40 minutes. She talked about the slope and the rows and the strain. She talked about the patchy drilling and the missing rolling and the fact that the headlands had not been plowed in for at least 2 seasons. She talked about the color of the leaves at the eastern edge, too pale, too soft, and too early, and about what that suggested concerning the soil beneath them. She talked about the brook at the bottom of the slope and the way the field drained into it instead of away from it. She did not talk about Mr. Patch, the steward, by name, and she did not talk about Aldith at all. She did not need to. At the end of 40 minutes, the Dowager Duchess set down her napkin, said very quietly, "Honoria, fetch your brother, and tell him to bring the field ledger from the south desk in his study," and rose from the table. By 8 o'clock that morning, Marisol Penhallow was standing in the Duke's study, with the south desk ledger open in front of her, and the Duke of Wenford reading over her shoulder. Honoria sat in the window seat with her knees drawn up and a piece of dry toast in her hand, watching the proceedings with the expression of a girl who had not been so awake in a year. The Dowager sat in the leather chair by the fire, perfectly still, perfectly silent, watching her grandson's face. The ledger was a quiet kind of horror. It wasn't, Marisol understood within 4 minutes, the work of a fool. A fool's ledger was wrong in the obvious places. This one was wrong in the small ones. 3 sacks here, half a wagon there. A reckoning of seed that, summed over 6 fields and 3 seasons, did not match the bills from the corn chandler at all, but did so almost. The almost was the elegance of it, and would have passed any audit by a steward of his own choosing. Mr. Patch had not been stealing the harvest. Mr. Patch had been stealing, very patiently, the seed. "Your Grace," Marisol said quietly, "I do not yet know who Mr. Patch was selling it to. I shall need to see his correspondence. But I can tell you what he was doing, and approximately how much he has taken, and I can tell you why the south field was planted with the wrong strain." The Duke of Wenford's face was as still as a stopped clock. "Tell me." He was covering, The south field was an experimental plot that ought to have been sown with seed, bought at a particular price from a particular merchant in Norwich. The cheapest way to make the books balance, when the seed had quietly walked off the estate to be sold elsewhere, was to plant the field with whatever was nearest to hand. Whatever was nearest to hand was a coast strain that someone had bought, almost certainly cheaply, almost certainly from a man who did not know what he was selling. And no one would notice the substitution unless, said the Duke, someone who knew barley walked across the field. Yes, Your Grace. And he did not expect anyone who knew barley to walk across the field. No, Your Grace. Because no one who knows barley, the Duke said softly, was supposed to be at my luncheon yesterday. The room went very still. It was Honoria, in the window seat, who put it together first. Ambrose. Yes, Honoria, I see it. Ambrose. Mr. Droge. I see it. Mr. Droge did not bring her by accident. No, Honoria. Mr. Droge brought her on purpose. The Duke set both his hands flat upon the desk. He looked at Marisol Penhallow across the open ledger, and for the first time since she had met him, for the first time since the wood pigeon and the wrong barley and the borrowed muslin, Marisol saw, plainly and unmistakably, the cold, ungentlemanly emotion of a man who was beginning to be afraid. Miss Penhallow, he said, when the surgeon permits Mr. Droge to speak, when he wakes, when he is lucid, when he can string 2 sentences, you will be the first person at his bedside. Not me. Not my grandmother. Not the magistrate. You, and you will ask him one question, and one question only. What question, Your Grace? You will ask him, Ambrose Thrale said. Who paid him to bring you here? The clock on the mantel struck the hour. In the corridor, somewhere 2 rooms away, Marisol heard, with the sudden clarity of a woman whose hearing has narrowed to a single thread, the soft, careful click of a door being closed by someone who did not wish to be heard closing it. She turned her head. So did the Duke. Honoria, he said, without raising his voice. Ring the bell. Honoria rang the bell. No one came. The bell rope of Wenford Hall ran down through 3 stories of plaster, and when no one came to its summons, it meant, the Duke explained without raising his voice, that someone in the house had cut the line in the servants' passage. He did not seem surprised. He seemed, if anything, very tired. Honoria, he said, go to Mrs. Quill. Tell her I want every member of this household, indoor and outdoor, to be accounted for by the half hour, by name, on paper. And tell her I want it done in such a way that no one understands they are being counted. Ambrose, that is not possible. Mrs. Quill will find it possible. Honoria went. The Dowager Duchess, who had not moved from the leather chair by the fire, said, It is Patch, Ambrose. Yes, ma'am. It has been Patch for at least 2 seasons. Yes, ma'am. I told your father he was a smiling man, and I told your father that smiling men in steward's coats were to be watched as one watches a hawk in a dovecote, and your father, God rest him, laughed at me. Well, she lifted her cup. Here we are. Miss Penhallow, you will accompany me to the south field at 3 o'clock this afternoon. We shall walk it together. You will tell me what you see, and I shall tell Ambrose what to do about it. Is that agreeable? It is, ma'am. And tonight, the Dowager went on, in the same level, almost bored voice, we shall hold a harvest dinner. The Duke set down the pen he had been turning in his fingers. Grandmother. Yes, Ambrose. You arrived 4 hours ago. We have a steward who has been stealing the seed corn. We have a man unconscious in the green guest room. We have, as of 3 minutes past, an unknown person somewhere in this house cutting bell ropes. and you are proposing, tonight, a harvest dinner. I am, Ambrose, proposing a harvest dinner for 14 in the long dining room, by candlelight, at 8. The dowager smiled. It was not a comfortable smile. I'm proposing it because Mr. Patch will be sitting at the lower end of that table in his Sunday coat, with a glass of my best wine in his hand, and he will be watching Miss Penhallow walk into that room on your arm in a gown borrowed from your sister, and he will understand, before the soup has been cleared, that he has been seen. That is, my dear, how one breaks a man of his nerve before the magistrate breaks the rest of him. We are not going to have him arrested today. We are going to have him frightened today. The arrest is a Tuesday matter. The Duke looked at his grandmother for a long, long moment. Ma'am, I begin to understand, he said at last, why my father was afraid of you. Your father was an excellent man, Ambrose, but he was a sentimentalist. Now go and put on a clean shirt. We have a great deal to do before 8 o'clock. By 3:30, Marisol was in the south field, with the dowager at her elbow and a slow gray wind moving through the rows. She walked the headlands first, then the diagonals, then the patch where the drilling had been thinnest. The dowager said almost nothing. Once or twice she stopped, lowered herself with the careful economy of an old woman who had once been a young horsewoman, and ran her gloved fingers along the soil at the base of a stalk. Once she pulled a head of barley clean from its stem, broke it open between her teeth, made a face, and spat the kernel out into the dirt. It tastes, she said, of the sea. It is a coast strain, ma'am. It ought to be 20 miles from here, on a salt wind farm, not on a clay slope draining into a freshwater brook. It will mildew before the moon turns. The yield will be perhaps 2/3 of what your grandson has been told to expect. The malt, if any of it can be malted, will not be worth selling. And the field below? The field below is sound, ma'am, but it has been planted late, by perhaps 10 days. Whoever drilled it was being asked to cover too much ground in too few hours. The pattern across the estate, ma'am, and I have only seen the south side, is consistent with a man who has been moving seed off the property for at least 2 seasons, and who has been planting whatever he can lay hands on in order to make the visible fields look full. The dowager looked at her for a long time. You sound like your grandfather, Miss Penhallow. Mom? Tobias Penhallow. I met him once, in '78. He came up to Hertfordshire to look at a malting barley I was thinking of putting in. He told me, in fewer words than you have just used, why I should not. I did not. I made a great deal of money that year. I had forgotten his face until just this moment, and now I see it again, around the eyes, in yours. It wasn't, Marisol understood, a compliment. It was something larger and stranger than a compliment. It was the first time in 15 years of being the orphan of a ruined seedsman that anyone had spoken to her of her grandfather as a man who had been listened to and had been right. She did not trust her voice. She nodded. Now, said the dowager briskly, tell me about your father. By 8 o'clock, the long dining room of Wenford Hall was a place transformed. Candles lit, the silver brought out, a centerpiece of late summer roses and ripe wheat, sheaves down the center of the table. The great dark portrait of the third Duke watching from above the mantel as 14 guests, hastily assembled from within 5 miles of the house, were seated by the dowager, according to a plan that no one but herself could have understood. Mr. Patch, the steward, was placed at the lower end of the table in his Sunday coat, exactly as foretold, with a glass of the Duke's best Madeira beside his right hand. He had arrived at 7:30, looking pleased to have been included. By 8:15, he was no longer pleased. Marisol was placed at the Duke's right. She wore a gown of dark gold silk, drawn from somewhere in Honoria's vast and seldom-touched wardrobe, taken in by Oldith, with pins and a steady hand in the space of 40 minutes, and pinned with a single garnet at her throat that had belonged, the dowager mentioned in passing, to her own mother. Marisol had tried to refuse the garnet. The dowager had looked at her with the slate-gray eyes and said, "When you have finished walking my barley, Miss Penhallow, you will give it back. Until then, it is in your keeping. Do not, please, fuss." The garnet rested cold at the base of her throat. She did not, all evening, touch it. At the midpoint of the second course, a clear soup, a fish she could not afterwards have named, the Duke leaned a little toward her and said, low, and only for her, "Mr. Patch has been watching you for 20 minutes. Yes, Your Grace. He has not yet eaten. No, Your Grace. He has just refilled his wine. That is the 3rd time, Your Grace. Miss Penhallow, Your Grace. After dinner, there will be cards in the long gallery. You will not play. You will sit with my grandmother, and you will let her introduce you to the local company as the agricultural advisor she has personally retained. Do not contradict her. Do not improve upon her. She has a particular phrasing she wishes to use, and she has rehearsed it twice in the carriage on the way down from the South Field, and she will be very cross if either of us spoils it. I shall not spoil it, Your Grace. You are doing very well. I am doing what I was paid to do. No, Miss Penhallow." His voice did not rise. It only altered, very slightly, the way a candle alters when a window is opened in a far room. "You were paid to be visible. You are doing a great deal more than that." She looked at him. Across the table, the candle flames trembled in a small, unfelt draught. The pale gray of his eyes had gone, in the warm light, to something almost the color of pewter, and there was something behind them she had not seen yet in any of their previous conversations, and would not have been able to give a name to, even if she had been asked. She picked up her glass. "Your Grace, I should be careful, were I you, of saying such things to a woman in a borrowed gown. And why is that, Miss Penhallow? Because she might begin to believe them." A long moment. He looked away first, and Marisol, who hadn't until that moment fully understood what was happening, felt something turn over very quietly inside her chest. After the dessert, after the ladies had withdrawn and returned, after the local rector had been induced to recite a perfectly dreadful piece of verse on the bringing in of the corn, the company moved through to the long gallery for cards. The corridor between the dining room and the long gallery was narrow, candle-lit, and floored in old oak that gave back every footstep. Marisol, slightly behind the rector's wife, was the last but one of the ladies to leave the dining room. She had paused, very briefly, to retrieve a fan she had set down beside her plate. By the time she stepped into the corridor, most of the company had moved on ahead. Lady Drusilla Marchpane had not. She was waiting, with one gloved hand resting upon the panel of a doorway, in the easy attitude of a woman who had stopped to admire a painting she was not looking at. She turned, smiling, as Marisol came up. "Miss Penhallow." "Lady Drusilla." "A small word, if you will permit me. I shall not detain you. The cards will keep." She did not wait for permission. "I wonder whether anyone has yet thought to tell you, my dear, that you do not belong here." Marisol did not move. "Oh, please," Lady Drusilla went on, in the same warm voice. "Do not mistake me for cruel. I mean it, in fact, kindly. The Dowager is amused by you tonight. The Duke is grateful to you for whatever small service you have rendered him in his fields. By Tuesday, they will have remembered, both of them, what they are and what you are not, and you will be returned to wherever Mr. Droge collected you from, and we shall all of us go on as before. I tell you only because I have seen this house break softer women than you appear to be. Better, I think, to leave on Monday than to be sent on Tuesday. Don't you agree?" She squeezed Marisol's arm, that same small touch like a pin, and went on toward the gallery without waiting for an answer. Marisol stood in the corridor for the count of 3. She had not heard, behind her, the slight inrush of breath at the dining room door, had not seen the Duke, who had stepped back into the doorway at the sound of his own name, stand very still in the shadow of the lintel, and not move, and not move, and not move, while Lady Drusilla's footsteps faded down the corridor. When Marisol turned to follow, the Duke was no longer there. She walked into the long gallery with her chin where it had been at dinner, and she sat, as instructed, beside the Dowager. She was introduced, in slow, precise sentences, to a stout woman who farmed 300 acres at Holling, to a thin one whose late husband had bred terriers, and to the rector's wife, who took her hand with great enthusiasm and informed her that any friend of dear Lady Honoria's was a friend of theirs. It was while the rector's wife was speaking that Marisol saw, at the far end of the gallery, Mr. Patch, the steward, leave the room. He left it slowly. He left it without hurry. He left it with the air of a man who had decided, perhaps a quarter of an hour ago, that he would take some air, and who had finished his Madeira before doing so. Marisol's hand tightened, very briefly, on her fan. "Miss Penhallow?" said the rector's wife. "Forgive me, ma'am, I am a little fatigued." "Of course, my dear. Shall I?" "If your ladyship will permit me," Marisol murmured to the Dowager. "I should like 5 minutes of air." The Dowager looked at her once, sharply, understood, and inclined her head a quarter of an inch. 5 minutes, Miss Penhallow." Marisol slipped through the side door into the smaller drawing room, through the smaller drawing room into the corridor, and through the corridor toward the back stairs. She did not run. Running was, she had been taught very young, the thing that was always remembered afterwards. She walked. Halfway down the back stairs, she heard, below her, the soft, careful click of a door being closed by someone who did not wish to be heard closing it. The same click. The same exact, hateful, intimate little click she had heard from the Duke's study that morning. She stood very still on the landing. She heard then the first real sound. A man's voice, low, urgent, almost a hiss. "Gone past the orchard, you fool. He's gone toward the brook." She did not know the voice. She knew, however, that it was not Mr. Patch's. She turned, lifted the gold silk clear of her ankles, and went very quickly back up the stairs the way she had come. In the long gallery, she crossed directly to the Duke. She did not curtsy. She did not pause. She set her hand upon his sleeve, and she said, in a voice meant only for him, "Your Grace, Mr. Patch is going toward the brook. He is not alone. There is a second man in this house." The Duke went still. "How many?" "At least one, Your Grace, that I have heard. Possibly more." "Where is my grandmother?" "At the cards." "Honoria?" "At the pianoforte." "Miss Penhallow, you will go to the green wing. You will lock the door. You will admit no one but Aldith and my grandmother. Do you understand me?" "I understand you. I will not do it." He looked at her. "Miss Penhallow, Your Grace, the ledger from the south desk is still on your study table. If there is a second man in this house, that is what he has come for. And I am the only person in this house, Your Grace, who can read it. Send a footman for the magistrate. Send another to the brook. I will go to the study. You will go to your grandmother." For one fractional instant, he looked as though he would argue. He did not argue. "Go," he said. "Take the little stair. And Miss Penhallow, yes, Your Grace, if anyone is in that study who is not me, you will scream. Loudly. as loudly as you have ever screamed in your life. Promise me." "I promise, Your Grace." She went. The Duke's study was empty. Marisol stood in the doorway for a long-held breath, the candle in her hand, throwing yellow light on the spines of the books and the dark shoulders of the desk, and she listened to a house that should have been full of laughter and was, instead, holding its own breath 2 stories above her. Then she stepped inside and closed the door. The ledger from the south desk was where they had left it that morning, open at the page where she had begun to make her marks in pencil. It had not been moved, but beside it, on the green leather of the Duke's blotter, and Marisol knew, with the cold, bright certainty of a woman who had stood in this room for 40 minutes that morning and observed every object on every surface, that it had not been there at noon, lay a small folded paper, sealed in plain wax, with no direction and no name. She did not pick it up. She walked round the desk to the far side. She set the candle down. She bent close, without touching the paper, and read what she could see of the seal. It was a barley sheaf, crossed with a hawk. She had seen that seal on the Penhallow papers in her father's old strong-box, the one her mother had been forced to sell for the brass of the lock the winter she was 12. It was the seal her grandfather Tobias Penhallow had used on his correspondence with the great houses, in the years when the great houses had bought from him, because a Penhallow letter, sealed and dispatched by Tobias's own hand, was as good as a contract in any malt house from Norwich to Hereford. It was not a seal that should have existed anymore. It was certainly not a seal that should have been pressed this evening in fresh red wax on a paper laid on the Duke of Wenford's desk. She did not pick it up. She turned instead to the ledger, and she opened it, not at the page she had marked that morning, but at the back, at the rearmost flyleaf. Ledgers of this size and quality almost always carried, at the very back, a folded sheet of older paper, a deed, an inventory, a list of rights, slipped in by some earlier steward and forgotten by every steward since. Her father had taught her this. The lies are at the front, Marie. The truths are at the back. The flyleaf was folded. She unfolded it. It was an inventory in a hand 60 years old of seed stocks lodged at Wenford Hall in the autumn of 1766. Wheat, rye, 2 oats, 6 barleys, and against the 6th barley in a different hand, in fresher ink, Penhallow long straw, 12 bushels, lent from T. Penhallow against future return, not to be sold. Marisol stopped breathing. 12 bushels of Penhallow long straw, the strain her grandfather had bred, the strain her father had revived, the strain the bank had ruined her family for, lent to the Wenfords 60 years ago and never returned. The door behind her opened. She did not turn at once. She closed the flyleaf. She closed the ledger. She picked up the candle. And then, only then, she turned. It was the Duke. He shut the door behind him with the same soft, careful click she had heard twice now in this house, and the sound, on him, was not sinister at all. He was alone. He had come up the back stairs. His hair was untidy. His cravat was loose. There was a smear of something pale, flour, dust, lime, along the side of his right hand. "Patch is taken," he said. "Where?" "At the brook. The second man got past the hedge. He was not Patch's man. He was Patch's master. And Miss Penhallow." He stopped. He had seen her face. "What?" "Your Grace." Her voice was perfectly level. "Was your great-grandfather a man who paid his debts?" "My great-grandfather. Miss Penhallow. This is not—" "It is, Your Grace." "Was he?" "He was thought a hard man and a fair one." "Why?" She held out the ledger. She had her finger on the line. He read it. He read it twice. He sat down very slowly on the edge of the desk. "My family," he said at last, very quietly, owes your family 12 bushels of seed. 60 years' worth, Your Grace, of 12 bushels. Compound. Compound, Your Grace. Miss Penhallow, Your Grace. That is. He laughed, not happily. A single sharp exhalation through the nose. A great deal of barley. It is, Your Grace, the better part of a small estate. He looked up at her. The pale gray of his eyes had gone, in the candlelight, very dark. He had been afraid for 40 minutes, downstairs, in the corridors and the orchard and the brook. The fear had not yet entirely gone out of him, and what was rising into its place was something else, something Marisol had not yet, in all her 30 hours under his roof, seen on his face. It was, she thought, almost relief, as though some long, cold, private equation he had been carrying alone had all at once shifted under his hand into a shape he could lift. Miss Penhallow, he said, Your Grace. When this house is quiet, when Patch is in the lockup, when the magistrate has gone home, when my grandmother has stopped giving orders, I have a great many things to say to you. I cannot say any of them tonight. I want you to know that I know I cannot. I want you to know that I know I have not earned the right to say them. I want you to know, his hand, very briefly, lifted as though to touch the back of hers on the ledger, and did not, that I am going to earn it. She did not move her hand. Your Grace. Miss Penhallow, you have not asked me whether I would let you. A long pause. No, he said. No, I have not. Forgive me. May I ask? She drew breath to answer. The study door opened without a knock. Lady Drusilla Marchpane stood on the threshold in pale green silk, her pearls at her throat, and her gloves in one hand. Behind her, in the corridor, the Dowager. Behind the Dowager, 3 of the local company who had been at the cards, and the rector's wife, and 2 footmen with raised candles, and Honoria, who had her hands pressed flat against her own mouth. Wenford, Lady Drusilla said, in a clear, sweet voice that carried perfectly to every person in the corridor. What are you doing in your study at this hour with Miss Penhallow? The Duke did not move from the edge of the desk. Marisol did not move from beside it. The candle, between them, burned perfectly straight. She did not sleep. She lay in the green wing in a borrowed shift, with the garnet still cold at her throat, and listened to the house go through its long, uneasy settling. The magistrate came at midnight. He went again at 2. Mr. Patch was taken to the lockup at the parish house. The second man, the master, the one in the orchard, had got past the brook and was, the Duke's groom reported, somewhere on the high road by Howling. He would not be caught tonight. He might not be caught at all. Marisol heard all of this through the door, in the low, careful voices of servants, who did not know she was listening. She heard also what they were saying about her. It was not on the whole kind. By 4:30, she was up and dressed. By 5, she was at the writing desk in the green wing, with a single sheet of Wenford paper before her, and the ink pot uncovered, and her hand quite still upon the pen. She wrote, in the end, 2 letters. The first was to her mother. I shall be home, she wrote, not in a fortnight as I told you in the Duke's letter, but on Monday. Do not be afraid. I have not been turned out. I have not been ill-used. I have done a thing I was hired to do, and I have done it well, and I am coming home with the agreed sum, and I shall tell you the rest of it when I can sit at our own table with tea between us. Do not let Linus speak to anyone of where I have been. Burn this when you have read it. I love you. The second was to the Duke. She wrote it 3 times. The first was angry. The second was wounded. The third was the one she sealed. Your Grace, she wrote. I have thought a great deal in the past few hours about what was said in your study last night, and what was seen, and what the seeing of it will mean for you, for your sister, for your grandmother, and for me. I do not think any of us at the time considered the seeing. I am not sure any of us could have. The candle was perfectly straight, and the air was perfectly still, and I do not believe we did anything in that room which a less practiced eye than Lady Drusilla's would have read as scandalous. But Lady Drusilla has a very practiced eye, and she will use it. I am therefore going home today, and not in a fortnight. I have walked the South Field. I have read the ledger. I have, between yesterday morning and last night, given you everything I was hired to give you, and a great deal more, and I shall send by the post, on Tuesday, a written report of every observation I have made on this estate, which your new steward, whoever he is, and I urge you to choose him from outside the county, may use as he sees fit. The report will be detailed. It will include the matter of the inventory at the back of the South Desk ledger, and what is owed by the Wenfords to the Penhallows, and how I think it ought, in justice, to be settled. The last is, of course, your business, and not mine. I do not write to you to claim it. I write to you to say that it exists in a paper 60 years old, in your own house, and that it would not, I think, have been found but for last night. So, perhaps last night was worth something to both of us. Do not come after me. Do not send your sister. Do not send Mr. Droge, who I understand is awake and lucid, and to whom I shall, on my way through the house, put the question you charged me to put. I expect he will answer me. I shall leave his answer with Mrs. Quill, sealed, for your hand and yours alone. I shall be home by Monday at the latest. By the second post on Tuesday, you shall have the report. By the end of the week, all of London will have something else to talk of, and Lady Drusilla will, I hope, be among them. I take with me, Your Grace, a very great gratitude. You hired me when no one in England has hired me for anything in 15 years. You listened to me about the barley when no one in England has listened to a Penhallow about barley since my father's collapse. You set my terms in your own hand on a piece of sealed paper. I shall keep that paper. I shall keep also, with your grandmother's permission, the memory of having walked her South Field with her at my elbow, because I don't expect, in the rest of my life, to walk a field with such a woman again. I don't keep the garnet. It is on the dressing table in the green wing. I am, Your Grace, in considerable and complicated obligation, Marisol Penhallow. She sealed the letter. She left it on the dressing table with the garnet on top of it as a paperweight. She put on her own traveling cloak. Aldith had laundered and pressed the coast-stained gown of the first day and folded it neatly at the foot of the bed. Marisol left the borrowed gowns where they hung and took only what she had come in. She was at the head of the back stairs at 6. She had her hand on the banister when she heard, behind her, the soft, careful click. She turned. It was Honoria. The girl was in her wrapper. Her hair was down, her gray eyes were swollen. She had, very plainly, not been to bed. Miss Penhallow, Lady Honoria, you are leaving? Yes. My brother does not know. No. He will be. Honoria's voice broke and recovered. He will be very angry, Miss Penhallow. I expect so. Not with you. With himself. Yes. I know. That is why I am going by the back stairs. Honoria looked at her for a long moment. Then she stepped forward, and she put a small folded thing into Marisol's hand. It was a card. A direction in London, in Honoria's own writing. My aunt, Honoria said. She is in Half Moon Street. She does not love my grandmother, and my grandmother does not love her, and that is the only useful thing you need to know about her. If anything goes wrong between here and Camden Town, you will go to her, and you will tell her you are my friend. Honoria, promise me. I promise. The girl kissed her, very quickly, on the cheek, and was gone. Marisol went down the back stairs. The kitchen door was unbolted. The yard was empty. The carter from the village, whom Aldith had bribed with 3 of Marisol's own shillings the night before, was waiting at the gate. By 6:30 on Sunday morning, Marisol Penhallow was on the London road. By the time the Duke of Wenford came down to breakfast, she was 11 miles away. It rained on Monday. It rained in Camden Town, the way it rains on small, narrow streets in late summer, a thin, gray, insistent rain that did not so much fall as settle, soaking the cobbles and the steps and the patient brown back of the chandler's pony tied at the corner. Marisol came up the street at 10:15 with her hood drawn and her cloak heavy, and 3 heads of the wrong barley still folded inside her reticule, because she hadn't, in a Sunday spent in a coaching inn at St. Albans, been able to bring herself to throw them away. Her mother was in the front room. Her mother's hands, the moment she saw Marisol's face, went up to her own mouth, and then down to her apron, and then up again. "Marie. Mother. Marie, you are home a week early." "I am, Mother." "Are you hurt?" "No, Mother." "Are you in trouble?" Marisol opened her mouth to say no, and instead heard herself say, very quietly, "I do not know yet." Her mother put the kettle on. By 11, they had drunk 1 pot of tea and were halfway through a second. Marisol had told her everything, not the soft version, the whole of it, the luncheon, the barley, Crispin, the Duke, the ledger, the dowager, the garnet, the corridor, Lady Drusilla in the doorway of the study, with the rector's wife behind her, and the candle burning straight. Her mother listened without interruption. When Marisol had finished, her mother set down the cup and said, "And the 12 bushels." "Yes, Mother." 60 years compound." "Yes. That is. Marie, that is a fortune." "It is a very great deal of barley, Mother. It is not yet a fortune. The Duke has not seen the inventory line through. He has only seen it. Whether anything comes of it is for him to decide, and for his lawyers, and I am not." The knock on the door was so soft that for a moment Marisol thought she had imagined it. Her mother went. She came back, slowly, with a sealed letter in her hand and a strange, small look on her face. "Marie, there is a man at the door, a footman, in livery. He says he is to wait for an answer." The seal on the letter was the seal of the Duke of Wenford. Marisol broke it. It was very short. "Miss Penhallow, I have your letter. I have read it 3 times. I shall not come after you. I shall not send my sister. I have respected, to the smallest article, every condition you set me on the afternoon of our agreement, and I shall respect this one also. But I am bound, as a matter of justice, and not of feeling, to acknowledge the inventory. I cannot acknowledge it by post. The Penhallow Longstraw debt is 60 years old, and is owed by the title, not the man. Its settlement requires the title's seal and the title's word, in the title's house, witnessed by the title's lawyer and an officer of the Crown. I cannot, Miss Penhallow, settle in Camden Town a debt that the Crown registers in Hertfordshire. I therefore propose the following. On Monday next, that is, in 8 days, at noon, I shall be at the chambers of Mr. Halford of Lincoln's Inn, with the original ledger, with the inventory line, with my grandmother as witness for the Wenford side, and with such of the Penhallow papers as my own people can find from the period in question. I shall require, on the Penhallow side, a representative bearing the family's seal. There is, my lawyer informs me, only one living person entitled to bear that seal. Yourself. Come or do not come. If you come as the head of your house, and you settle the debt as you see fit. The footman has a purse for your traveling expenses, which you will accept, because the journey is occasioned by Wenford business, and not by your own. He will wait at the corner of your street until the half hour for your reply, and then he will go. I have not, Miss Penhallow, said any of the things I told you in the study I would say. I shall not say them in this letter. I should like you to know, however, that I have not stopped intending to say them. They will keep until you give me leave, or until you do not. Yours in considerable and complicated obligation also, Wenford. Marisol read the letter twice. Her mother, who had read it over her shoulder, said nothing. After a long moment, Marisol stood, took down a sheet of her mother's plain paper, dipped the pen, and wrote in 3 lines. Your Grace, I shall be at Mr. Halford's chambers on Monday at noon. I bring the seal. MP, she gave it to the footman at the door. By Monday next, she would not own the harvest of Wenford. That was a thing for lawyers and old paper and the slow grinding of the crown. By Monday next, however, by the Monday her mother and Linus and the chandler and 3 of the surrounding streets would remember for the rest of their lives, Marisol Penhallow would walk into the chambers of Mr. Halford of Lincoln's Inn under her own name, with the Penhallow seal in her own glove as the head of her own house. That she understood, sitting at her mother's kitchen table at 11:30 on a wet Camden Monday, with the kettle ticking on the hob and the rain easing on the cobbles outside, was already the harvest. It had only taken a week. Mr. Halford's chambers were at the back of Lincoln's Inn, up 2 flights of dark stairs, and through a door of black-grained oak with a brass plate that had not been polished within Marisol's memory of London. She came up those stairs at 12:05 on a clear, pale Monday in September, a week after the rain in Camden Town, in a gown of plain dark blue that her mother had made over from one of her own, and trimmed at the cuffs with a strip of her grandmother's lace. She wore no jewelry. She carried, in a small black pouch on a ribbon at her wrist, the thing Linus had finally been able to recover from Mr. Threlfall, the pawnbroker in Cheapside, on Friday afternoon. The Penhallow seal. A short brass handle. A chip in the wooden grip, where her grandfather had dropped it on a stone floor in 1791. The barley sheaf, crossed with the hawk. Her hand, on the brass plate of Mr. Halford's door, was perfectly steady. The door was opened by a clerk. The clerk took her cloak. He showed her, without preamble, into a long paneled room with a window onto a small green court. And in that room, at a long polished table, 4 people were already standing. Mr. Halford himself, at the head, small, white-haired, entirely composed. The Dowager Duchess of Wenford, in unbroken black, at his right. The Crown's officer, a Mr. Pine, a thin man with very blue eyes, at his left. And at the foot of the table, alone, the Duke of Wenford. He had not, she thought, slept enough. He looked up as she entered. He did not move. He did not speak. He waited. Around the table, with the quiet, practiced tact of 3 people who had agreed upon their parts in advance, the Dowager and the lawyer and the Crown's man all turned, very slightly, toward the window, and gave them the room. "Miss Penhallow," the Duke said, "Your Grace. You came. I said I would. Yes." A pause. "Are you well?" "I am well, Your Grace." "Your mother?" "Well, she sends her thanks for your letter. Marisol drew breath. Kept it. She has not kept a letter from a man in 15 years. I thought you should know." He inclined his head. A muscle moved, once, at his jaw. "Mr. Halford," he said, without taking his eyes from her, "if you will." Mr. Halford, who had been folding and unfolding a sheet of paper at the head of the table, with the air of a man who had been folding and unfolding sheets of paper for 46 years, set it down. "Miss Penhallow, the matter is straightforward. The ledger of Wenford Hall, dated autumn 1766, records a loan of 12 bushels of Penhallow long-straw seed barley from Mr. Tobias Penhallow to the 3rd Duke of Wenford, lent against future return, with the express stipulation that the seed was not to be sold. Settlement was never effected. The debt, by the conventions of the period and the standing of the houses, was understood to bear interest of 1 bushel per annum compounded, payable at any future demand, by the seal of the lender. By the calculation of this office, signed yesterday by myself, and witnessed by Mr. Pine, he laid a paper before her. The present sum owed by the Duke of Wenford to the head of the House of Penhallow stands at 431 bushels of long straw seed, or, at present, market rates, and in the alternative offered by the Wenford estate, in lieu of physical delivery, the sum of £3,246 sterling. The room held very still. Marisol set the seal on the table. Mr. Halford, Miss Penhallow, my grandfather lent that seed without interest. He told my father so, in my father's hearing, 3 years before he died. He said, "I lent it, lad, on a handshake. The interest is between me and my conscience, and my conscience is satisfied." Mr. Halford looked, for the first time, faintly disconcerted. Miss Penhallow, the convention of the period was a convention, sir. Not a promise. I am the head of the House of Penhallow. I am here with the seal. I will not take £3,246 from the Wenford estate on the back of a debt my grandfather told my father he did not consider owing. Across the table, the Duke of Wenford, who had not, in any of this, moved, closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. "Miss Penhallow," said the dowager, without turning from the window, "may I ask what you will take?" "You may, ma'am. What will you take, Miss Penhallow?" Marisol drew breath. "I will take," she said, "the 12 bushels." A pause. "The 12 bushels, Miss Penhallow." "The 12 bushels, ma'am. The original loan. Returned in kind. In Penhallow long straw barley, viable this autumn's harvest, sealed and delivered to my mother's address in Camden Town. With it, I will take a single sheet of paper, signed by His Grace and witnessed by Mr. Pine, stating that the debt of 1766 between the houses of Penhallow and Wenford has been discharged in full. With that, her voice against every prediction she had made of it on the journey from Camden, held, I will take the right to use the words of the Penhallow long straw in the sale of malting barley to any house in England, which right has not been mine to use since the year my father lost his land, and which is, to me and to my mother and to my brother, worth more than £3,000. I do not want the money, ma'am. I want my name back." The Dowager Duchess of Wenford turned very slowly from the window. "Mr. Halford," she said. "Yes, ma'am. You will draw the paper as Miss Penhallow has described it. You will draw it now. You will draw it on the strongest paper in your office, and you will use the largest of your seals. Yes, ma'am. And, Mr. Halford, yes, ma'am. Add a clause." The slate eyes did not move from Marisol's face. "That the Wenford estate, at its own cost, and out of its own purse, shall undertake to revive in cultivation upon its own land, beginning this October, 20 acres of Penhallow long straw, under the supervision of Miss Marisol Penhallow, who shall be paid for that supervision at the rate proper to a senior agricultural advisor of an estate of this size, for so long as she shall consent to provide it. This is not a condition of the discharge. It is a separate engagement. Miss Penhallow may refuse it," Mr. Halford wrote. Marisol did not, for a long moment, trust herself to speak. "Ma'am, it is not charity, Miss Penhallow. It is barley. You said it yourself. We do not, in this country, listen to a Penhallow about barley anymore. I propose to remedy it. Will you accept?" Marisol, very slowly, picked up the seal. She set it, with a small, bright crack of the brass on the wood, in the center of the table. "I accept, ma'am." The papers were drawn. The papers were signed. Mr. Pine of the Crown affixed his stamp. Mr. Halford affixed his largest seal. The Dowager Duchess of Wenford signed as witness, in a hand that had not lost a stroke in 60 years. The Duke of Wenford signed last, with his great-grandfather's name above his own, and when he had set down the pen, he stood at his end of the table for a long, quiet moment, looking at it. Then he raised his eyes. "Mr. Halford, Mr. Pine, ma'am, if I may have the room." They went without a word. The door closed. "Miss Penhallow, Your Grace, you said in your letter that I had not earned the right to say what I had begun to say in my study. That was just. I would like, now, your leave to say it." "You have my leave, Your Grace." He came round the table. He stopped a careful pace short of her. He did not reach for her hand. He had learnt, in the 8 days since she had walked down the back stairs of Wenford Hall in the dawn, what she would not be reached for. "You walked into my field," he said, "and you told me my barley was wrong. You walked into my dining room and you let my grandmother frighten Mr. Patch out of his nerve. You walked into my study at midnight, and you read 60-year-old paper by candlelight, while there was a man on my grounds who would have struck you down had he found you doing it. You walked out of my house at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning, rather than allow Lady Drusilla Marchpane to use you as a weapon against me. And you walked into Mr. Halford's chambers an hour ago, Miss Penhallow, and you refused £3,246 in order to take 12 bushels of seed and a piece of paper with your name upon it. Yes, Your Grace. You do not belong here, Miss Penhallow." She went very still. "You do not belong here," he said again, "in the sense in which Lady Drusilla used those words to you at the harvest dinner. And yes, Miss Penhallow, I heard her say them in the corridor before the cards. And I have been carrying them with me for 9 days, and I have not been able to put them down. You do not belong, in her sense, to the world of women who are bought and sold by the season for the suitability of their connections. You belong to a different world. You belong to the world of people who walk a field and read it, of people who open a 60-year-old ledger at the back instead of the front, of people who refuse £3,000 because their name is worth more. I do not, Miss Penhallow, belong to that world by birth. I should very much like to be admitted to it by you." She did not answer at once. "That is not, Your Grace, a proposal." "No, Miss Penhallow. It is a request for instruction. I should like to know how a man comes, by his own work and his own attention and the steady use of his own days, to be considered worthy of the regard of a woman who reads ledgers from the back. I do not ask you to marry me today. I do not ask you to marry me at all, until and unless you wish it. I ask you to allow me the time and the access and the courtesy of your honest correction in which to try." She looked at him for a long time. "And the 20 acres, Your Grace, are yours to plant, whether or not you ever take a second look at the man who owns them. And Lady Drusilla? Lady Drusilla left Wenford Hall on Sunday morning at 10. She has not been invited back. My grandmother has, I am told, been somewhat firm with her mother on the matter. And Mr. Patch will be tried at the next assize. We have the second man's name now. Mr. Droge, when he could speak, was very useful. And Mr. Droge is in my employ, Miss Penhallow, on a tight rein and a small wage and a written undertaking, signed in his own hand and witnessed by my grandmother, never again to use a young woman of his acquaintance as a screen for his business. I believe him to be sincere. I also pay a footman, as a matter of policy, to watch him." She almost laughed. "Your Grace." "Yes, Miss Penhallow. The 20 acres begin in October." "They do." "I shall need to walk them before the plowing." "Whenever you wish." "And I shall require, as a condition of the engagement, the removal of every coast strain from every Wenford field, within 5 miles of the brook." "Done." "And I shall require," her voice steadied, "that you do not, Your Grace, in October or in any month thereafter, use the words 'you do not belong here' in my hearing again, in any sense, whatever the speaker, whatever the company. I do not, Your Grace, find them improving." He looked at her. For the first time in her acquaintance with him, the Duke of Wenford smiled. It was a small smile, and not a confident one. It was the smile of a man who had been told, in plain language, that he was being allowed to stay. "You have my word, Miss Penhallow." "Then we shall begin in October, Your Grace." "We shall begin in October." She picked up the seal from the table. She looked, as she did so, through the long window of Mr. Halford's chambers onto the small green court of Lincoln's Inn, where 2 clerks were crossing the gravel in the September sun, and a wood pigeon, of all the unlikely things, in the center of London, was calling somewhere out of sight. She put the seal in her pouch. She drew the ribbon at her wrist. She went home to her mother in Camden Town with 12 bushels of her own name to come. It was 11 days later that the letter was found. Aldith found it. She was the one who had been sent up in the 3rd week of September to clear the green wing of the last of Lady Honoria's gowns, so that they might be sent on to London for cleaning. And she opened, in the bottom of the wardrobe, a small flat box of cedar that she had not noticed on either of her previous visits. The box had been pushed to the back, and the back had been pushed against the wall, and a fold of pale blue silk had hung over both, for, by Mrs. Quill's later reckoning, considerably more than a year. Inside the box was a single letter. It was sealed in faded red wax. The seal was a barley sheaf, crossed with a hawk. The direction, in a hand that the dowager identified, on being shown it, with the smallest catch in her voice, said only, "To the next Penhallow who stands in this house." It was dated 1799. It had been written by Tobias Penhallow. The dowager opened it. The Duke read it. The Duke, in the first private act of any kind he had performed without consulting his grandmother, in the 3 weeks since she had arrived early at Wenford Hall, sealed it again in a clean sheet of his own paper, and sent it by a private hand to Camden Town. Marisol opened it on the 10th of October, the morning of the day she was to walk the 20 acres for the first time. "Whichever of you it is," her grandfather had written, in a hand she recognized from the fly-leaves of his books, grandson, granddaughter, great, or further on than that. If you are reading this, you have come into a Wenford house under a Penhallow name, and you have come either as a guest, or as a stranger, or as a debtor, and I write to tell you that you are none of those. I lent the 3rd Duke 12 bushels of long straw on a handshake in the autumn of 1766. He was a hard man and a fair one. He did not pay me back in his lifetime. I told my own son not to ask, because I knew that house, and I knew that the asking would be the asking of a poor man of a rich one, and that is a thing that breaks more between 2 houses than the debt itself. So the debt has stood. It has stood through my son's time and into my grandson's, if it is my grandson reading this, and into further hands, if it is not. If you are reading this, you are owed 12 bushels of barley. Take them. Do not take, for God's sake, the interest. The interest belongs to the lawyers, and the lawyers feed on what is between 2 houses until there is nothing of either left. Take the 12 bushels and the use of the name, and walk out of that house with both, and shake the hand of whoever gave them to you, and let it be the end of it. And then, child, plant. A Penhallow at a Wenford gate is a thing that has not happened in 3 generations, and I do not know what brought you there. But I know what should bring you home. Plant the long straw. Plant it well. Plant it on land that you, yourself, have walked. Do not lend it. Do not sell it short. Do not take a partner for it. And, if you marry a person who has stood in the field, with you in the rain. Your loving grandfather, who never met you, Tobias Penhallow. Marisol read it twice, sitting at her mother's kitchen table. She did not weep. She had not been a woman in any of her remembered life who wept easily, and she did not become one over a letter from a dead man. But she sat very still for a long time, and her mother, who had been peeling apples at the other end of the table, set down the knife and reached across without speaking and laid her hand over Marisol's hand, and they sat like that until the kettle began to whistle on the hob. Then Marisol folded the letter. She put it in her pocket, and at 3 o'clock that afternoon, she stood at the head of 20 acres of clean Wenford clay, with the Duke beside her in his oldest coat, and his sleeves turned back, and his sister Honoria a little way off arguing cheerfully with a plowman about the proper depth of a furrow, and the dowager seated in a black shawl on a small chair that had been carried out for her by 2 footmen and set in the lee of a hedge, and Marisol Penhallow took out of her reticule a small linen bag containing the 12 bushels worth of seed, drawn from this year's last clean Wenford harvest, blessed by Mr. Pine of the Crown, sealed by Mr. Halford of Lincoln's Inn, and sewn, at her own instruction, into her own hand. She looked at the Duke. Your Grace, Miss Penhallow, you have, I hope, walked this field already this morning. I have, twice. And the slope? East to west, Miss Penhallow, not north to south. And the strain? Penhallow long straw, Miss Penhallow. Nothing else for half a mile. Then we may begin, Your Grace. She knelt. She opened the bag. She set the first handful of seed, in the warm, bright October air, into the turned dark earth of Wenford. The Duke of Wenford knelt in the dirt beside her, a thing he had not done in his life, his grandmother remarked afterward, in any field on any of his estates, and a thing that 2 of the watching ploughmen would tell of in the village inn for years. And he set the second handful in beside her own. The wood pigeon, somewhere in the hedge, called 3 short notes and a pause, and 3 short notes and a pause. Behind them, on her small chair in the lee of the hedge, the Dowager Duchess of Wenford watched her grandson kneel in the dirt of his own field, beside the daughter of a ruined seedsman and the granddaughter of Tobias Penhallow, and she said, very softly, to no one but herself, Well, now we begin. Thank you for being here. You are the reason this story exists, because you believe in women who walk into rooms that were not built for them and stay. In men who learn, slowly and at their own cost, the difference between owning a field and listening to one. In endings that are not given, but earned, bushel by bushel, on land that has been walked in the rain. Your presence makes this space warm and welcoming, and I am grateful for every quiet hour you spend with these characters. If a line or a moment stayed with you, I would love to hear which one. Your engagement is what tells me which stories to write next. And if you would like more Regency romances with grit in the soil and intelligence in the heroine, please consider subscribing. Thank you for being here. You make this place what it is.